On January 10, 2023, the state of Texas executed Robert Alan Fratta for arranging the murder of his estranged wife, Farah Fratta, 28 years earlier. Fratta was a public safety officer, cross-trained as both a police officer and a firefighter, a man who wore a badge and presented himself to the world as a dedicated public servant and devoted father. He used his children as his alibi the night he had Farah killed. He did not apologize. He did not speak. He snored 6 times as the drug took hold, and then he was still. If you follow cases where the warnings were in the official record before someone died, and nobody acted on them, subscribe now. This case has that failure written across the testimony of at least 17 different people. Farah Baquer was born on August 5, 1961, in Guildford, Surrey, England. She was 33 years old when Howard Guidry shot her twice in the head in her own garage. She had moved to the Houston area after marrying Robert Fratta in 1983. She worked at American Airlines. Her closest friend and colleague there, Kitty Waters Sneed, described her as warm and vivacious, as someone who tried, even in the worst of what was happening in her marriage, to protect her 3 young children from the reality of it. Farah was extremely scared of Fratta. She acted very subdued in the final period of the marriage. She had filed for divorce. She was fighting for her kids. She had 3 of them. Bradley, born around 1987. Daniel, born around 1988. Amber, born around 1990. On the night she was killed, she left the beauty salon with her hair still wet because she was in a hurry to be home before Robert brought the children back at 8. The custody trial was scheduled for November 28, 1994, less than 3 weeks away. She was almost through it. A man was hiding in her backyard playhouse waiting for her. Farah's father, Lex Baquer, said afterwards, "My poor daughter, she stood in front of him. He could have spared her." Her mother, Betty Baquer, rushed to the scene. Her eyes were open, Betty said, "and I just put my hand up on her, just shut her eyes, and I felt her. She was cold. It hurt so much." Farah's youngest, Amber, was 4 years old. In the weeks after the murder, a social worker observed Amber walking around the office telling anyone who would listen, "The bad guys put bullets in my mommy's head." All 3 children were raised by their maternal grandparents, Lex and Betty Baquer, who adopted them. All 3 changed their surnames to Baquer. Amber fell asleep each night, holding a framed photograph of herself with her mother, and, according to her grandfather, used to talk to that picture. Robert Alan Fratta was born on February 22, 1957. He became a bodybuilder and built most of his adult social network through gyms in the Houston area. He worked as a public safety officer for Missouri City, Texas, a hybrid role that involved cross-training as both a police officer and a firefighter. To the world outside his marriage, he looked the part. Kitty Waters Sneed put it directly. To the outside world, Bob Fratta was an upstanding citizen. Investigator Andy Kahan of Crime Stoppers of Houston would later describe him as a classic narcissist who actively cultivated that image. Behind it, Farah's 1992 divorce filing alleged physical, sexual, and emotional abuse across 9 years of marriage. In a December 1993 deposition for those proceedings, Farah documented in specific detail extreme sexual demands Fratta had made of her, including acts involving asphyxiation, coprophilia, and urophilia. The presiding family court judge reportedly described the conduct as among the most depraved he had encountered in family court proceedings. That deposition was later ruled admissible at Fratta's retrial as evidence of motive and intent. Fratta was simultaneously using telephone chat lines and phone dating services to contact women and discuss sexual fantasies involving bondage and third parties. This was documented through testimony at his 2009 sentencing phase by acquaintances who had spoken with him directly. None of that was the part that should have saved Farah. This is the part that should have saved Farah. Beginning sometime after the 1992 divorce filing, Fratta began telling people he wanted his wife killed. Not one person, not 2. Prosecutor Kelly Siegler, who tried the case twice, stated that between 15 and 17 different men who worked out at the same gym heard Fratta talk a lot about getting rid of his wife. A gym acquaintance heard him talk about putting some slugs into Farah using a 9mm. Another was told Fratta planned to shoot her in the head. A woman he approached at a diner was asked if she knew someone who would kill his wife. or hurt her a little bit. A woman from a phone dating service was asked whether she knew any black people who could do it. Two of his own colleagues at Missouri City Public Safety heard him say it. One testified that Fratta, upset about child support, said he would kill Farah, do his time, and get his kids back when he got out. A second Missouri City officer recalled him saying almost the same thing. These were not strangers at a bar. These were his co-workers in a workplace context, inside a department where he carried the authority of a public safety officer. James Podhorsky, a gym friend, heard more than anyone. Fratta told Podhorsky he had been carrying a gun to clubs specifically to shoot Farah and stage it as a carjacking. He showed Podhorsky a written schedule he had compiled of Farah's daily activities to give to a hitman. He explained the payment structure: cash up front, balance from Farah's $100,000 life insurance policy, and an overseas trust. His price ranged from $1,000 to $5,000, depending on who he was talking to. Fratta also told Podhorsky why he spoke so openly about it. His reason, documented at trial, was deliberate. So the day that it happens, the police wouldn't know where to start or how to conduct their investigation. They would have so many leads. Not one of the 15 or more people who heard him say this called the police. Not one of his colleagues reported it to the Missouri City Public Safety Department. No formal investigation followed. No welfare check reached Farah. No psychiatric referral. No disciplinary action. Nothing in the available record documents any institutional response by the department to what at least two of its own officers heard a colleague say. There was also a prior attack on Farah. Some months before November 9th, a masked intruder broke into her bedroom at night, armed with a stun gun. Her son, Bradley, then around 6 years old, woke to her screaming. He and his siblings stood outside the bedroom door screaming, "Let our mommy go! Leave her alone!" The attacker used the stun gun on Farah and fled. She reported it to the Harris County Sheriff's Office. She told investigators she believed her husband was behind it. The attacker was never identified or charged. HCSO Detective Larry Davis was monitoring Fratta as a result. That attack is part of the documented record. Fratta was never charged in connection with it. Approximately 6 weeks before the murder, Fratta approached Joseph Pristash, a gym acquaintance and ex-convict, at the President and First Lady Health Club. Their contact intensified. Mary Gipp, Pristash's girlfriend, observed the two of them speaking privately with increasing frequency. In the week before November 9th, Fratta called Gipp's apartment multiple times to speak to Pristash. Gipp later told investigators she knew a murder was being planned. On the day of the murder, she left work early because she could not concentrate. She considered calling Farah, but said she did not know her last name. She did not call police. Pristash arranged a shooter. His name was Howard Paul Guidry. On November 9th, 1994, Fratta took his 3 children to Wyatt's cafeteria for dinner, then drove to a Catholic church in Humble for Wednesday evening activities. Witnesses described him as real tense. He attended a parents' meeting, but left repeatedly to make and receive calls from the church office phone. Bradley, 7 years old, later testified that his father also used a payphone at the restaurant during dinner. While Fratta was at church, Pristash drove Guidry in a 4-door silver Nissan, one headlight burned out, to Farah's neighborhood. They scouted a nearby grocery store payphone to confirm it could receive calls. Then they returned. Pristash dropped Guidry at the property. Guidry was dressed in black. He was carrying a .38 Charter Arms revolver. That gun had a history. Fratta bought it in 1982. In 1993, Farah gave it to her father for safekeeping. In the summer of 1994, her father returned it to Fratta. Fratta then passed it to Pristash in exchange for car work. Pristash gave it to Guidry. Guidry climbed the fence into Farah's backyard and hid in the small children's playhouse. At approximately 7:45 in the evening, Farah left the beauty salon with her hair still wet. At approximately 8:20 p.m., neighbors Laura and Darren Holscher were sitting on their living room couch, which faced a large bay window with a direct sightline to Farah's garage across the street. Laura was nursing her infant. Farah pulled into the driveway. While he waited, Guidry made 2 calls from a cell phone to Pristash at the grocery store payphone. When Farah arrived, Guidry came out of the playhouse. He tried the side door of the garage. It was locked. Farah opened the garage door. Guidry stepped inside, raised the .38, and shot her once in the head. She fell beside her car. She was still moving. He shot her a second time in the head. Laura Holscher heard the first shot and looked out the window. She saw Farah fall. She heard the second shot. She called 911 immediately. She told the dispatcher, "I just saw a shooting. I was in my living room nursing my baby, and I looked out my window, and our neighbor was outside our garage, and she was shot 2 times." She reported a man in dark clothing, picked up by a car that drove away. Pristash was waiting in the silver Nissan. He drove Guidry from the scene. Medics reached Farah in the garage. She was alive. Guidry had shot her twice in the head, and she was still alive. Paramedics airlifted her to Herman Hospital. She was pronounced dead in the emergency room. Investigators recovered bullet fragments from the garage floor and from a life preserver hanging on the garage wall. 1 full bullet and 1 partial were recovered during the autopsy. Deputy Bailey was among the first officers on scene. He noted that no one had gone through Farah's gym bag, wallet, or purse. This was not a robbery. Robert Fratta arrived at the scene at approximately 8:45 p.m. with his 3 children. He walked calmly toward the house. Deputy Bailey intercepted him. Bailey did not tell Fratta that Farah was dead. Fratta did not ask whether his wife was alive. He did not ask what had happened. He told Bailey he was in a hurry. He asked if they could expedite matters. He showed no distress. He showed no surprise. After being told Farah had been shot, Fratta was taken in for a 14-hour interrogation. A portion was captured on video. Each of the 3 times the detective left the room, Fratta vigorously rubbed his eyes with both hands for several seconds. During one absence, he lowered his head and appeared to sob briefly. On camera, asked who might hate his wife enough to kill her, he said, "Nobody that I can think of. I can't think of anybody that hates her." After the interrogation, he walked toward the television cameras outside with a smile on his face. The next day, or the day after, Fratta went to Podhorsky's tanning salon and said, "If everybody keeps their mouth shut, everything will be all right." He then coached Podhorsky on a cover story, that Podhorsky had gone to Farah's home to scare her, and accidentally fired the shots. Within days of the murder, Fratta called the insurance company holding Farah's $100,000 life insurance policy. Trial testimony documented him as very demanding, arrogant, wanting information on the policy, on the beneficiary. He became angry and hung up when told the homicide designation meant the policy would not pay immediately. When a friend told him to stay out of trouble after the murder, Fratta replied, "What could be worse than capital murder?" Investigators focused on Fratta from the moment he arrived at the scene. His alibi was confirmed. He had been at church with his children when Guidry pulled the trigger. Prosecutors would later say directly, "How many people use church as their alibi and use their own children as their alibi? Who does that?" Phone records subpoenaed from the church documented calls from the church office to Mary Gipp's apartment. Gipp was initially uncooperative. Prosecutors offered immunity. She provided a statement implicating all 3 men. On March 1, 1995, Howard Guidry was arrested for an unrelated bank robbery. A .38 Charter Arms revolver was found in his backpack. Registration records showed the gun had been purchased by Robert Fratta in 1982. Lex Baquer identified it as the gun Farah had given him for safekeeping and which he had returned to Fratta the previous summer. An HPD firearms examiner confirmed that 1 bullet fragment recovered from Farah's garage had been fired from this weapon. A second fragment was too damaged for a definitive match, though examiners stated it was likely from a weapon by the same manufacturer. Fratta's later appeals challenged the ballistics evidence on that second fragment. The courts rejected that argument. Fratta was arrested on April 21, 1995, 5 months after the murder. His first trial began on April 9, 1996, in Harris County, Texas. The prosecution called more than a dozen gym acquaintances who documented Fratta's repeated solicitations. James Podhorsky testified about the written schedule of Farah's daily activities, the payment discussions, and Fratta's cover story coaching. Mary Gipp testified about Pristish's role and his behavior after the murder, including unloading and hiding the gun. The gun itself was entered into evidence. The phone records were entered into evidence. A clinical psychologist testified that Fratta lacked appreciation of others' feelings and regarded women as little girls to be dominated. The jury also heard about the $1,050 cash envelope found in Fratta's car. His 7-year-old son, Bradley, had later asked him at a supervised visit, "Daddy, why did you have all that money in your car?" That question is documented in a social worker's case notes. The jury deliberated for less than 1 hour. Guilty. Death by lethal injection. Fratta showed no emotion. Family members from both sides wept. The conviction did not hold. On October 1, 2007, U.S. District Judge Melinda Harmon granted federal habeas relief, finding that the prosecution had improperly relied on the custodial confessions of Guidry and Pristash, which were inadmissible under Crawford v. Washington. The Fifth Circuit upheld her ruling. In her opinion, Harmon wrote that the trial evidence showed Fratta to be egotistical, misogynistic, and vile, with a callous desire to kill his wife. She also wrote that the evidence strongly suggested that Fratta was somehow involved in his wife's death. Nevertheless, the confessions were constitutionally inadmissible, and a retrial was ordered. The retrial began on May 5, 2009. The confessions were excluded. Both Guidry and Pristash, now convicted and on death row themselves, invoked the Fifth Amendment and did not testify. The prosecution rebuilt its case around the original witness testimony, the physical evidence, and Mary Gipp, with key portions of her testimony admitted under a conspiracy exception. And this time, Fratta's 3 children were adults old enough to testify. Bradley described arriving at the crime scene with his father and watching him act very surprised as to what was going on. Daniel told the jury, "There's been times I wish I had my mom. I wish I had a dad too." Amber described visiting Fratta in jail the previous year. He had a grin on his face like he had no emotion to him at all. Seeing his daughter break down and cry, I thought he would have some sort of emotion. He didn't. The defense presented mitigation evidence at sentencing. Attorneys argued Fratta suffered from paranoid delusional thinking stemming from a brain injury, that he had witnessed his father die of a heart attack during a hunting trip as a teenager, and that he was emotionally stunted, genuinely fearful of losing his children, and had maintained model behavior across 15 years of incarceration. They argued for a life sentence. All 3 children urged the jury to sentence their father to death. On May 14, 2009, the jury returned the same verdict: guilty. On May 29, 2009, the sentence was the same: death. After the verdict, the presiding judge issued an order barring Fratta from profiting financially from the case: no books, no movies, no media deals. Victim advocate Andy Cahan stated it was the first such order issued in Texas. The appeals that followed covered every available avenue. Fratta argued insufficient evidence, disputed ballistics, faulty jury instructions, and juror impartiality concerns. The Fifth Circuit dismissed his post-retrial federal appeal in May 2018. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected his standard appeal in January 2019. In final appeals filed on the morning of January 10, 2023, Fratta's lawyers argued that prosecutors had withheld evidence that an eyewitness had been hypnotized by investigators before trial, and that the hypnosis caused her to change an initial account in ways that served the prosecution's case. Prosecutors denied the hypnosis produced any new identification. No court found in Fratta's favor on this claim. 2 applications to the U.S. Supreme Court were denied that morning. No justices recorded a dissent. That afternoon, a Travis County District Judge issued a civil injunction against use of allegedly expired pentobarbital. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals lifted it. The Texas Supreme Court rejected a further challenge. The execution proceeded. In the weeks after the execution, records obtained by journalists showed that TDCJ had received 8 new doses of pentobarbital 5 days before Fratta's execution. One of those vials was used. TDCJ had not disclosed the new batch, citing its desire to preserve its drug inventory. That opacity was a documented institutional transparency issue separate from the question of Fratta's guilt. At the Walls unit in Huntsville, on the evening of January 10, 2023, Fratta was strapped to the gurney with IV needles in both arms. His only witness was his spiritual advisor, Barry Brown, who stood over him, placed his prayer book on the pillow beside Fratta's head, rested his right hand on Fratta's right hand, and prayed for hearts that have been broken, and people who grieved and those who will grieve in days ahead. He asked God to be merciful to Bobby. The warden asked for a final statement. Fratta said, "No." One word. Brown resumed praying. Fratta stared at the ceiling. He never looked at the witness window where his son, Bradley, stood, and where Farah's brother Zane stood beside him. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. He snored loudly 6 times. Then nothing moved. He was pronounced dead at 7:49 p.m., 24 minutes after the pentobarbital began. Harris County DA Kim Ogg spoke afterwards. Farah Fratta's life was negotiated down to $1,000 and a car. For this, she was murdered. Robert and Farah had 3 children. One of them was here tonight. Fratta never apologized. There was no question about his guilt. 2 separate juries tried him, convicted him, and sentenced him to death. And tonight, justice was had. Andy Cahan, who had come because Farah's father asked him to, said, "Bob was a coward in 1994 when he arranged the murder for hire of his estranged wife. He was a coward in 1994, and 28 years. Plus later he still was a coward tonight, when he was offered an opportunity to at least extend an olive branch to his son that he knew was watching, as well as Farah's brother, and he still chose the coward way out." Lex Baquer had died in 2018. Before he died, he asked Cahan a simple thing. "If I cannot be there, will you go in my place? Because I want to make sure this actually happens." Cahan was there. Bradley and Zane did not speak to the media. Farah Baquer was 33 years old. She left the salon with her hair wet because she was trying to get home before her children arrived. She had a custody trial scheduled for November 28th. She had been fighting to get out and to keep her kids for more than 2 years. The custody trial never happened. Her parents raised her children. Her youngest daughter fell asleep each night talking to a photograph. The man who paid $1,000 and a Jeep to have her shot twice in the head was the 132nd person sentenced to death in Harris County, Texas, to be executed, more executions than any other single county in a country with a death penalty, except Texas as a whole. He said one word at the end. The word was no. Here is the question this case leaves behind, and I want you to answer it in the comments. At least 2 of Fratta's colleagues at Missouri City Public Safety heard him state, in specific terms, that he planned to kill his wife rather than pay child support, and neither one reported it. When an explicit, repeated, specific threat to kill someone is made directly to co-workers inside a law enforcement department and goes unreported, should bystanders who hear it face legal consequences if they stay silent and the threatened person is later murdered? Tell me where you land on that. Subscribe if you want more of these cases, the ones where the record shows exactly who knew what and when and nobody moved. There are too many of them.